Good evening, and welcome back to Footnotes and Folly. I am Professor Reginald St. John Pemberton. Thomas Paine has declared that 'tis time to part. Tonight he shows his arithmetic. Part 3 completes the pamphlet of the present ability of America, where Paine prices the entire British Navy ship by ship and gun by gun to prove America could build her own from her own tar, timber, and iron. Then the appendix, added when King George's speech from the throne reached Philadelphia on, we are told, the very day the pamphlet first went on sale, and finally the address to the Quakers, Paine's tart farewell to the pacifists who had published against the rebellion. The pamphlet did its work. Washington had it read to his soldiers. By most accounts Paine gave his profits to the cause, and 6 months after publication came the 4th of July. The complete text concludes, in plain modern English. Let us begin.
I have never met a man, either in England or America, who has not admitted that a separation between the two countries would happen sooner or later. And there is no case in which we have shown less good judgment than in trying to define what we call the rightness or fitness of the continent for independence. Since everyone accepts the measure itself, and differs only about the time for it, let us take a general view of things, in order to remove mistakes and try, if possible, to discover the proper time. But we do not need to look far. The question ends at once, because the time has found us. The general agreement, the glorious union of all things, proves the fact. Our great strength does not lie in numbers, but in unity. Yet our present numbers are enough to repel the force of the whole world. At this time the continent has the largest body of armed and disciplined men of any power under heaven. It has just reached that level of strength at which no single colony can support itself alone, while all of them, united, can accomplish the matter. Anything either more or less than this might have fatal effects. Our land force is already sufficient. As for naval affairs, we cannot be unaware that Britain would never allow an American warship to be built while the continent remained in her hands. Therefore, 100 years from now we would be no further advanced in that branch than we are now. In truth, we would be less advanced, because the country's timber is diminishing every day, and what remains at last will be far away and difficult to obtain. If the continent were crowded with inhabitants, its suffering under the present circumstances would be unbearable. The more seaport towns we had, the more we would have both to defend and to lose. Our present numbers are so well matched to our needs that no man needs to be idle. The decline of trade supplies an army, and the needs of an army create a new trade. We have no debts. Whatever debt we may contract for this cause will serve as a glorious memorial of our virtue. If we can leave posterity with a settled form of government, an independent constitution of its own, then the purchase will be cheap at any price. But to spend millions merely to get a few vile acts repealed, and only to drive out the present ministry, is unworthy of the cost. It treats posterity with the greatest cruelty, because it leaves them the great work to do, and leaves a debt on their backs from which they receive no benefit. Such a thought is unworthy of a man of honor, and is the true mark of a narrow heart and a petty politician.
Here Paine turns debt, that dreariest of dinner guests, into political cement. He argues that a moderate war debt would bind the colonies together, provided it bought independence rather than a temporary repeal of taxes. Notice the generational sting: spend now for liberty, or leave your children both the bill and the unfinished revolution.
The debt we may contract does not deserve our concern, if only the work is accomplished. No nation ought to be without a debt. A national debt is a national bond, and when it bears no interest, it is in no case a burden. Britain is oppressed with a debt of more than £140 million sterling, for which she pays more than £4 million in interest. As compensation for her debt, she has a large navy. America has no debt and no navy. Yet for the 20th part of the English national debt, she could have a navy twice as large. The navy of England is not worth, at this time, more than £3.5 million sterling. The first and second editions of this pamphlet were published without the following calculations, which are now given as proof that the above estimate of the navy is correct. See Antiques Naval History, Introduction, page 56. The cost of building a ship of each rate, and furnishing her with masts, yards, sails, and rigging, together with a proportion of 8 months' boatswains and carpenters' stores, as calculated by Mr. Burchett, Secretary to the Navy, is as follows, in pounds sterling. For a ship of 100 guns, 35,553, of 90 guns, 29,886, of 80 guns, 23,638, of 70 guns, 17,785, of 60 guns, 14,197, of 50 guns, 10,606, of 40 guns, 7,558, of 30 guns, 5,846, and of 20 guns, 3,710. From this, it is easy to add up the value, or rather the cost, of the whole British Navy, which in the year 1757, when it was at its greatest glory, consisted of these ships and guns, 6 ships of 100 guns, at 35,553 each, costing 213,318, 12 ships of 90 guns at 29,886 each, costing 358,632. 12 ships of 80 guns at 23,638 each, costing 283,656. 43 ships of 70 guns at 17,785 each, costing 764,755. 35 ships of 60 guns at 14,197 each, costing 496,895. 40 ships of 50 guns at 10,606 each, costing 424,240. 45 ships of 40 guns at 7,558 each, costing 340,110. 58 ships of 20 guns at 3,710 each, costing 215,180, and 85 sloops, bombs, and fireships, taken one with another at 2,000 each, costing 170,000. The cost was therefore 3,266,786, with 233,214 remaining for guns, making 3,500,000. No country on the globe is so happily placed or so inwardly capable of raising a fleet as America. Tar, timber, iron, and cordage are her natural products. We need go abroad for nothing. The Dutch, by contrast, who make large profits by hiring out their warships to the Spaniards and Portuguese, must import most of the materials they use. We ought to regard the building of a fleet as an article of commerce, because it is the natural manufacture of this country. It is the best money we can spend. A navy once finished is worth more than it cost. It is that fine point in national policy where commerce and protection are joined. Let us build. If we do not need the ships, we can sell them, and by that means replace our paper currency with ready gold and silver.
This naval arithmetic is not decorative bookkeeping. Paine is answering the practical man who says, "Splendid rhetoric, Mr. Paine, but where are the ships?" He uses figures from Burchett's naval history, then points to America's timber, tar, iron, and cordage. Britain need not be outnumbered everywhere, only what she can spare across an ocean must be faced.
On the subject of manning a fleet, people in general fall into great mistakes. It is not necessary that even 1/4 of the men be sailors. The terrible privateer, Captain Death, endured the hottest engagement of any ship in the last war, yet had fewer than 20 sailors on board, though her full crew numbered more than 200 men. A few able and sociable sailors will soon teach enough active landsmen the common work of a ship. Therefore, we can never be more capable of beginning maritime affairs than we are now. While our timber is still standing, our fisheries are blocked up, and our sailors and shipwrights are out of work. Ships of war with 70 and 80 guns were built 40 years ago in New England, and why not the same now? Ship building is America's greatest pride, and in time she will excel the whole world in it. The great empires of the East are mostly inland, and therefore shut out from the possibility of rivaling her. Africa is in a state of barbarism. No power in Europe has either so great a stretch of coast or so full an internal supply of materials. Where nature has given one, she has withheld the other. To America alone she has been generous with both. The vast empire of Russia is almost shut out from the sea. Therefore her boundless forests, her tar, iron, and cordage are only articles of commerce. As a matter of safety, ought we to be without a fleet? We are no longer the small people we were 60 years ago. At that time we might have trusted our property in the streets, or rather in the fields, and slept securely without locks or bolts on our doors or windows. The situation is now changed, and our methods of defense ought to improve as our property increases. A common pirate, 12 months ago, might have come up the Delaware and forced the city of Philadelphia to pay immediately whatever sum he pleased. The same might have happened to other places. Indeed, any daring fellow in a brig of 14 or 16 guns might have robbed the whole continent and carried off $500,000 in money. These circumstances demand our attention and show the necessity of naval protection. Some people may say that after we reconcile with Britain, she will protect us. Can we really be so foolish as to mean that she should keep a navy in our harbors for that purpose? Common sense tells us that the power which has tried to subdue us is, above all others, the least fit to defend us. Conquest can be carried out under the appearance of friendship, and after our long and brave resistance, we may at last be tricked into slavery. And if her ships are not to be allowed into our harbors, I ask, how is she supposed to protect us? A navy 3,000 or 4,000 miles away can be of little use, and in sudden emergencies, no use at all. Therefore, if we must in the future protect ourselves, why not do it for ourselves? Why do it for another? The English list of warships is long and frightening, but not a tenth of them are fit for service at any one time. Many of them no longer truly exist, yet their names are proudly kept on the list, even if only a plank of the ship remains. And of those that are fit for service, not a fifth can be spared for anyone's station at one time. The East and West Indies, Mediterranean, Africa, and other parts over which Britain stretches her claim, all make heavy demands on her navy. Through a mixture of prejudice and inattention, we have formed a false idea about the Navy of England, and have talked as if we would have to face the whole of it at once. For that reason, some have supposed that we must have a navy just as large, and because that cannot be done instantly, a group of disguised Tories has used the argument to discourage us from even beginning. Nothing can be farther from the truth than this. If America had only a 20th part of the naval force of Britain, she would be far more than a match for her. Since we neither have nor claim any foreign dominion, our whole force would be used on our own coast. There, in the long run, we would have a 2-to-1 advantage over those who must sail 3,000 or 4,000 miles before they can attack us, and then the same distance back again in order to repair, refit, and replace their crews. And although Britain, by means of her fleet, can restrain our trade with Europe, we have just as strong a hold over her trade with the West Indies, which, by lying so near the continent, is entirely at its mercy. Some method could be found to maintain a naval force in time of peace, even if we did not think it necessary to support a permanent navy. If premiums were given to merchants to build and use in their business ships carrying 20, 30, 40, or 50 guns, with the premiums measured according to the loss of cargo space to the merchants, then 50 or 60 of those ships, together with a few guard ships kept constantly on duty, would maintain a sufficient navy. This could be done without burdening ourselves with the evil so loudly complained of in England, letting a fleet lie rotting in the docks during peacetime. To unite the strength of commerce and defense is sound policy, for when our strength and our wealth support each other, we need fear no outside enemy. In almost every article of defense we are abundant. Hemp grows so vigorously that we need not lack cordage. Our iron is superior to that of other countries. Our small arms are equal to any in the world. Cannon we can cast whenever we please. Saltpeter and gunpowder we are producing every day. Our knowledge improves by the hour. Resolution is part of our natural character, and courage has never yet forsaken us. Therefore, what is it that we lack? Why is it that we hesitate? From Britain we can expect nothing but ruin. If she is ever admitted again into the government of America, this continent will not be worth living in. Suspicions will always arise, insurrections will constantly occur, and who will go out to suppress them? Who will risk his life to force his own countrymen back into foreign obedience? The dispute between Pennsylvania and Connecticut over some unlocated lands shows the insignificance of a British government, and fully proves that nothing but continental authority can regulate continental matters. Another reason why the present time is better than all others is this: the fewer our numbers are, the more land remains unoccupied. Instead of being wasted by the king on his worthless dependents, that land may later be used not only to pay the present debt, but also to provide steady support for government. No nation under heaven has such an advantage as this. The infant state of the colonies, as it is called, is not an argument against independence, but an argument in favor of it. We are numerous enough, and if we were more numerous, we might be less united. It is worth observing that the more populated a country becomes, the smaller its armies are. In military numbers, the ancients far exceeded the moderns, and the reason is clear. Since trade follows population, men become too absorbed in trade to attend to anything else. Commerce weakens the spirit both of patriotism and of military defense. And history tells us plainly enough that the bravest achievements have always been accomplished in the youth of a nation. With the growth of commerce, England has lost its spirit. The city of London, despite its numbers, submits to continued insults with the patience of a coward. The more men have to lose, the less willing they are to risk anything. The rich are generally slaves to fear, and submit to courtly power with the trembling double dealing of a spaniel. Youth is the seed-time of good habits, in nations as well as in individuals. It might be difficult, if not impossible, to form the continent into one government half a century from now. The great variety of interests caused by an increase of trade and population would create confusion. Colony would be set against colony. Each, being able to stand alone, might scorn the help of the others, and while the proud and foolish gloried in their little distinctions, the wise would lament that the union had not been formed earlier. Therefore, the present time is the true time to establish it. The closeness formed in infancy, and the friendship formed in misfortune, are the most lasting and unchangeable of all. Our present union bears both marks. We are young, and we have been distressed, but our harmony has withstood our troubles, and fixes a memorable era for posterity to glory in. The present time is also that special time which comes to a nation only once, the time when it forms itself into a government. Most nations have let that opportunity slip away, and by doing so have been forced to receive laws from their conquerors instead of making laws for themselves. First they had a king, and only afterward a form of government, whereas the articles or charter of government should be formed first, and men should be delegated afterward to carry them out. But from the errors of other nations, let us learn wisdom and seize the present opportunity to begin government at the right end. When William the Conqueror conquered England, he gave the people laws at the point of a sword. And until we agree that the seat of government in America is legally and authoritatively established, we will always be in danger of seeing it seized by some successful ruffian who may treat us in the same way. Then where will our freedom be? Where will our property be?
Paine is kicking the throne where it is most tender, its family tree. William invaded in 1066, and Paine's own phrasing elsewhere is gloriously brutal, calling him a French bastard who landed with armed banditti. That is not antiquarian gossip. It is his legal point. Hereditary monarchy begins, rather awkwardly, with successful violence wearing a crown.
As for religion, I hold that every government has an unavoidable duty to protect all sincere believers in it, and I know of no other business government has with religion. Let a man put away that narrowness of spirit, that selfishness of principle, which the misers of every profession are so reluctant to give up, and he will at once be freed from his fears on that subject. Suspicion belongs with mean souls, and it poisons all good society. For myself, I fully and conscientiously believe that it is the will of the Almighty that there should be a variety of religious opinions among us. It gives a wider field for our Christian kindness. If we all thought in exactly the same way, our religious character would lack the opportunity to be tested, and on this generous principle, I look on the different denominations among us as children of the same family, differing only in what are called their Christian names. Earlier, I offered a few thoughts on the wisdom of a continental charter, for I presume only to offer hints, not complete plans. Here I take the liberty of mentioning the subject again, and of observing that such a charter should be understood as a solemn bond of obligation, which the whole community enters into in order to support the rights of every separate part, whether those rights concern religion, personal freedom, or property. A firm bargain and a fair account make long friends. On a former page I also mentioned the necessity of a large and equal representation, and there is no political matter that deserves our attention more. A small number of electors, or a small number of representatives, are equally dangerous. But if the number of representatives is not only small, but unequal, the danger is greater. As an example, I mention the following case. When the Associators' petition was before the House of Assembly of Pennsylvania, only 28 members were present. All the Bucks County members, 8 in number, voted against it, and if 7 of the Chester members had done the same, this whole province would have been governed by only 2 counties, a danger to which it is always exposed. The unjustified overreach which the House also made in its last sitting, in order to gain improper authority over the delegates of that province, ought to warn the people at large how they trust power out of their own hands. A set of instructions for the delegates was put together which, in sense and practical business, would have disgraced a schoolboy, and after being approved by a very few, outside the doors, they were carried into the House and passed in the name of the whole colony. Yet, if the whole colony knew with what ill will that House has entered into some necessary public measures, they would not hesitate for a moment to think them unworthy of such a trust. Immediate necessity makes many things convenient which, if continued, would grow into oppressions. Convenience and right are different things. When the calamities of America required a consultation, there was no method so ready, or at that time so proper, as appointing persons from the several houses of assembly for that purpose, and the wisdom with which they have proceeded has preserved this continent from ruin. But since it is more than probable that we shall never be without a Congress, every friend of good order must admit that the method for choosing members of that body deserves consideration. And I put this question to those who study mankind: is representation and election not too great a power for one and the same body of men to possess? When we are planning for posterity, we ought to remember that virtue is not hereditary. It is often from our enemies that we gain excellent maxims, and we are frequently startled into reason by their mistakes. Mr. Cornwall, one of the Lords of the Treasury, treated the petition of the New York Assembly with contempt because, as he said, that House consisted of only 26 members. Such a trifling number, he argued, could not decently stand for the whole. We thank him for his involuntary honesty. To conclude, however strange it may seem to some, and however unwilling they may be to think so, it does not matter. Many strong and striking reasons can be given to show that nothing can settle our affairs as quickly as an open and determined declaration for independence. Some of those reasons are these. First, it is the custom of nations, when any two are at war, for other powers not involved in the quarrel to step in as mediators and bring about the first terms of peace. But while America calls herself the subject of Great Britain, no power, however well disposed toward her, can offer mediation. Therefore, in our present condition, we may go on quarreling forever. Secondly, it is unreasonable to suppose that France or Spain will give us any kind of assistance if we intend only to use that assistance to repair the breach and strengthen the connection between Britain and America, because those powers would suffer from the consequences. Thirdly, while we declare ourselves subjects of Britain, we must, in the eyes of foreign nations, be considered rebels. The example is somewhat dangerous to their own peace, men in arms under the name of subjects. We here on the spot can explain the paradox, but joining resistance with subjection requires an idea far too refined for common understanding. Fourthly, suppose a manifesto were published and sent to foreign courts, setting out the miseries we have endured and the peaceful methods we have used in vain to obtain redress, declaring at the same time that, since we can no longer live happily or safely under the cruel temper of the British court, we have been driven by necessity to break off all connections with her, and also assuring all such courts of our peaceful disposition toward them, and of our desire to enter into trade with them. Such a memorial would produce more good effects for this continent than if a ship were loaded with petitions to Britain. Under our present name of British subjects, we can neither be received nor heard abroad. The custom of all courts is against us, and will remain against us until, by independence, we take rank with other nations. These proceedings may at first appear strange and difficult, but like all the other steps we have already passed through, they will in a little time become familiar and agreeable. And until independence is declared, the continent will feel like a man who keeps putting off some unpleasant business from day to day, while knowing it must be done, who hates to begin it, wishes it were over, and is continually haunted by the thought that it is necessary. Since the first edition of this pamphlet was published, or rather on the very day it appeared, the king's speech also appeared in this city. If the spirit of prophecy had guided the birth of this pamphlet, it could not have produced it at a more fitting moment or at a more necessary time. The bloody temper shown in the one proves the need to follow the doctrine of the other. Men read it as an act of revenge, and the speech, instead of frightening anyone, opened the way for the firm and manly principles of independence.
A neat thunderclap of timing, this. Paine's pamphlet appeared in Philadelphia on January 10, 1776, just as George III's October speech, declaring the colonies in rebellion, reached American ears. Paine had been in the country barely 14 months. Treason, one might say, had scarcely unpacked its trunk.
Ceremony, and even silence, whatever motive may produce them, become harmful when they give the smallest appearance of approval to base and wicked acts. Therefore, if this rule is accepted, it naturally follows that the king's speech, as a finished piece of villainy, deserved then, and still deserves now, the general hatred of both the Congress and the people. Yet, because the domestic peace of a nation depends greatly on the purity of what may properly be called national manners, it is often better to pass some things over in silent contempt than to use new public forms of disapproval that might introduce even the smallest change in that guardian of our peace and safety. Perhaps it is mainly because of this careful delicacy that the king's speech has not before now suffered a public execution. The speech, if it may be called one, is nothing better than a deliberate and shameless libel against truth, the common good, and the existence of mankind. It is a formal and pompous way of offering human sacrifices to the pride of tyrants. That this general massacre of mankind is one of the privileges and the certain consequence of kings. Since nature does not know them, they do not know nature, and although they are beings of our own creation, they do not know us and have become the gods of their creators. The speech has one good quality: it is not designed to deceive, and we could not be deceived by it even if we wished to be. Brutality and tyranny are written plainly on its face. It leaves us in no doubt. Every line convinces us, even as we read it, that he who hunts the woods for prey, the naked and untutored Indian, is less a savage than the King of Britain. Sir John Dalrymple, the supposed father of a whining, Jesuitical piece falsely called the Address of the People of England to the Inhabitants of America, has perhaps imagined in vanity that the people here would be frightened by the pomp and description of a king. In doing so, though very unwisely for himself, he has given the real character of the present one. But if you are inclined to pay compliments to an administration which we do not complain of, it is very unfair in you to withhold them from that prince, by whose nod alone they were permitted to do anything. By that administration he means the Marquis of Rockingham's, at the repeal of the Stamp Act. This is Toryism indeed. Here is idolatry without even a mask. Anyone who can calmly hear and digest such doctrine has given up his claim to reason. He is an apostate from the order of manhood, and ought to be considered as one who has not only surrendered the proper dignity of man, but has sunk himself below the rank of animals, and crawls contemptibly through the world like a worm. However, it now matters very little what the King of England either says or does. He has wickedly broken through every moral and human obligation, trampled nature and conscience under his feet, and by a steady and constitutional spirit of insolence and cruelty brought upon himself universal hatred. It is now America's interest to provide for herself. She already has a large and young family, whom it is more her duty to care for than to give away her property in order to support a power that has become a disgrace to the names of men and Christians. You whose office is to watch over the morals of a nation, whatever sect or denomination you belong to, and you also who are more directly the guardians of public liberty, if you wish to preserve your native country unstained by European corruption, you must secretly wish for separation. But leaving the moral part to private reflection, I shall chiefly confine my further remarks to the following points. First, that it is in America's interest to be separated from Britain. Secondly, which is the easiest and most practical plan, reconciliation or independence. I will add some occasional remarks. In support of the first point, I could, if I thought it proper, produce the opinions of some of the ablest and most experienced men on this continent, men whose views on the subject are not yet publicly known. In reality, the point is self-evident. No nation in a state of foreign dependence, with its commerce limited and its legislative powers cramped and chained, can ever rise to any real greatness. America does not yet know what wealth is, and although the progress she has made is unmatched in the history of other nations, it is only childhood compared with what she could reach if she had, as she ought to have, legislative power in her own hands. England is at this moment probably craving something that would do her no good even if she obtained it, while the continent hesitates over a matter that will be its final ruin if neglected. It is the commerce of America, not the conquest of America, by which England is to benefit, and that commerce would continue in large measure if the countries were as independent of each other as France and Spain, because in many articles neither can find a better market. But the independence of this country from Britain, or from any other power, is now the main and only object worth contending for. Like all other truths discovered by necessity, it will appear clearer and stronger every day. First, because it will come to that sooner or later. Secondly, because the longer it is delayed, the harder it will be to accomplish. I have often entertained myself, both in public gatherings and private company, by quietly noticing the attractive but false arguments of people who speak without thinking. Of the many I have heard, this one seems the most common, that if this break with Britain had happened 40 or 50 years from now instead of now, the continent would have been better able to throw off dependence. My answer is that our military ability at this moment comes from the experience gained in the last war, and in 40 or 50 years that experience would be entirely gone. By then, the continent would not have a general, or even a military officer, left, and we, or those who come after us, would know as little about war as the ancient Indians. If this single point is considered closely, it proves beyond answer that the present time is better than any other. The argument is this: at the end of the last war, we had experience but lacked numbers. 40 or 50 years from now, we would have numbers but no experience. Therefore, the proper time must be some particular point between those two extremes, when enough of the former still remains and a proper increase of the latter has been gained. That point of time is the present time. The reader will forgive this digression, since it does not strictly belong under the heading with which I began. I now return to that subject with the following position. If affairs are patched up with Britain, and she remains the governing and sovereign power of America, which in our present circumstances means giving up the whole point, then we shall deprive ourselves of the very means of paying down the debt we have contracted, or may yet contract. The value of the back lands, of which some of the provinces have been secretly deprived by the unjust extension of the limits of Canada, if valued at only £5 sterling per 100 acres, comes to more than 25 millions in Pennsylvania currency, and the quit rents, at 1 penny sterling per acre, come to 2 millions yearly. It is by the sale of those lands that the debt may be paid off without burdening anyone, and the quit rent reserved on them will always reduce, and in time will wholly support, the yearly expense of government. It does not matter how long the debt takes to pay, so long as the lands, when sold, are applied to discharging it, and for carrying this out, the Congress of the time will serve as the Continental trustees. I now proceed to the second main question: which plan is easiest and most practical, reconciliation or independence, with some occasional remarks. A man who takes nature as his guide is not easily driven from his argument, and on that ground I answer generally that independence is one single, simple line, contained within ourselves, while reconciliation is extremely tangled and complicated, and requires the interference of a treacherous and changeable court. That alone gives the answer beyond doubt. The present state of America is truly alarming to every man capable of reflection. We are without law, without government, and without any form of power except what is founded on courtesy and granted by courtesy. We are held together by an unheard of agreement and opinion, which nevertheless may change, and which every secret enemy is trying to break apart. Our present condition is legislation without law, wisdom without a plan, constitution without a name, and strange as it is astonishing, perfect independence contending for dependence. There is no precedent for this. Such a case has never existed before, and who can tell what the outcome may be?
Notice how Paine makes uncertainty itself do the work of argument. In January 1776, independence was still a dangerous word, and he had been in America barely 14 months. Yet this anonymous Englishman, printed by Robert Bell on 3rd Street, is telling the colonies that their halfway house has no roof. One admires the nerve tyrants generally call it impudence.
No man's property is secure under the present loose system of things. The mind of the multitude is left to chance. Seeing no fixed object before them, they pursue whatever fancy or opinion happens to suggest. Nothing is criminal, there is no such thing as treason, therefore everyone thinks himself free to act as he pleases. The Tories would not have dared to assemble offensively, if they had known that by doing so their lives were forfeited under the laws of the state. A line of distinction should be drawn between English soldiers taken in battle and inhabitants of America taken in arms. The first are prisoners, but the latter are traitors. One forfeits his liberty, the other his head. Despite all our wisdom, there is a visible weakness in some of our proceedings that encourages division. The continental belt is buckled too loosely. If something is not done in time, it will be too late to do anything, and we shall fall into a state in which neither reconciliation nor independence will be practical. The king and his worthless supporters have returned to their old game of dividing the continent, and among us there are printers ready to spread attractive falsehoods. The artful and hypocritical letter that appeared a few months ago in 2 of the New York papers, and also in 2 others, proves that there are men who lack either judgment or honesty. It is easy to get into corners and private places and talk about reconciliation. But do such men seriously consider how difficult the task is, and how dangerous it may become if the continent divides over it? Do they take into account all the different kinds of people whose situations and circumstances must be considered, as well as their own? Do they put themselves in the place of the sufferer whose whole property is already gone, and of the soldier who has left everything for the defense of his country? Their poorly judged moderation fits only their own private situations, without regard for others. The result will convince them that they are reckoning without their host. Some people say, put us back on the footing we were on in '63. My answer is that Britain no longer has the power to grant that request, and she will not even propose it. But if she could grant it, and even if she did, I ask a reasonable question. By what means could such a corrupt and faithless court be forced to keep its promises? Another parliament, or even the present one at some later time, could repeal the obligation, claiming it had been obtained by force or granted foolishly. In that case, where would our remedy be? There is no going to law with nations. Cannon are the barristers of crowns, and the sword, not the sword of justice but of war, decides the case. To return to the footing of '63, it would not be enough merely to put the laws back into the same condition. Our circumstances would also have to be put back into the same condition. Our burned and destroyed towns would have to be repaired or rebuilt. Our private losses would have to be made good. Our public debts contracted for defense would have to be paid. Otherwise we would be millions worse off than we were at that envied time. If such a request had been granted a year ago, it would have won the heart and soul of the continent. But now it is too late. The Rubicon is passed.
Notice how Paine says the old arrangement cannot simply be restored. That was not mere rhetoric. By January 1776, Lexington and Concord were already behind them, towns had burned, debts had mounted, and George III's October speech, declaring the colonies in rebellion, was reaching American ears. One does not unboil that imperial pudding.
Besides, taking up arms merely to force the repeal of a money law seems as unjustified by divine law, and as offensive to human feeling, as taking up arms to force obedience to that law. The aim on either side does not justify the means, because men's lives are too valuable to be thrown away over such trifles. It is the violence already done and threatened against our persons, the destruction of our property by armed force, and the invasion of our country by fire and sword, that gives us a clear conscience in using arms. And the moment this kind of defense became necessary, all subjection to Britain ought to have ended. The independency of America should have been considered as beginning from, and being declared by, the first musket fired against her. This is a consistent line to draw. It is not drawn by whim or stretched out by ambition, but produced by a chain of events of which the colonies were not the authors. I will conclude these remarks with the following timely and well-meant warnings. We should reflect that there are three different ways by which independency may hereafter be brought about, and that one of these three will, sooner or later, be the fate of America: by the legal voice of the people in Congress, by military power, or by a mob. It may not always happen that our soldiers are citizens, or that the multitude is a body of reasonable men. Virtue, as I have already noted, is not hereditary, and it is not perpetual. If independency is brought about by the first of these means, then every opportunity and every encouragement lies before us to form the noblest and purest constitution on the face of the earth. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation like the present has not happened from the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand, and a race of men, perhaps as numerous as all Europe contains, is to receive its share of freedom from the events of a few months. The thought is solemn. And from this point of view, how trifling, how ridiculous, do the small and petty objections of a few weak or self-interested men appear when weighed against the business of a world. If we neglect the present favorable and inviting moment, and independence is later brought about by any other means, we must charge the consequences to ourselves, or rather to those whose narrow and prejudiced souls habitually oppose the measure without either inquiry or reflection. There are reasons in support of independence that men should think about privately rather than be publicly told. We should not now be debating whether we shall be independent or not. We should be anxious to accomplish it on a firm, secure, and honorable foundation, and uneasy that it has not yet begun. Every day convinces us of its necessity. Even the Tories, if such beings still remain among us, should be the most eager of all men to promote it. Just as the appointment of committees at first protected them from popular anger, so a wise and well-established form of government will be the only certain means of continuing that protection securely for them. Therefore, if they do not have virtue enough to be Whigs, they ought to have prudence enough to wish for independence. In short, independence is the only bond that can tie us together and keep us together. Then we will clearly see our object, and our ears will be legally closed against the schemes of an enemy who is both intriguing and cruel. Then we will also be on the proper footing to treat with Britain. There is reason to conclude that the pride of that court will be less hurt by treating with the American states for terms of peace than by treating with those whom she calls rebellious subjects for terms of accommodation. It is our delay that encourages her to hope for conquest, and our hesitation only tends to prolong the war. Since we have withheld our trade without gaining any good effect from it, in order to obtain redress for our grievances, let us now try the alternative. Let us independently redress them ourselves, and then offer to open the trade. The mercantile and reasonable part of England will still be with us, because peace with trade is preferable to war without it. And if this offer is not accepted, other courts may be approached. On these grounds I rest the matter. And since no answer has yet been offered to refute the doctrine contained in the former editions of this pamphlet, that is negative proof either that the doctrine cannot be refuted, or that the party in favor of it is too numerous to be opposed. Therefore, instead of staring at each other with suspicion or doubtful curiosity, let each of us hold out to his neighbor the hearty hand of friendship, and unite in drawing a line that, like an act of oblivion, will bury every former disagreement in forgetfulness. Let the names Whig and Tory disappear. Let no other names be heard among us than those of a good citizen, an open and resolute friend, and a virtuous supporter of the rights of mankind, and of the free and independent states of America. To the representatives of the religious society of the people called Quakers, or to those among them who took part in publishing the recent piece titled The Ancient Testimony and Principles of the People Called Quakers Renewed, with respect to the King and Government, and touching the commotions now prevailing in these and other parts of America, addressed to the people in general. The writer of this is one of the few who never dishonors religion by mocking or picking quarrels with any denomination whatever. In matters of religion, all people are accountable to God, not to man. For that reason, this letter is not really addressed to you as a religious body, but as a political body, meddling in affairs which the quiet principles you profess teach you not to touch. Since you have, without proper authority, put yourselves in the place of the whole body of the Quakers, I, in order to stand on equal ground with you, must put myself in the place of all those who approve the very writings and principles against which your testimony is directed. I have chosen this unusual position, so that you may see in me the same presumptuous character which you cannot see in yourselves. For neither I nor you have any rightful claim to political representation. When people have left the right path, it is no wonder if they stumble and fall. And it is clear from the way you have handled your testimony that politics, for a religious body of men, is not your proper walk. However suitable it may have seemed to you, it is still a confused mixture of good and bad, unwisely joined together, and the conclusion you draw from it is both unnatural and unjust. For the first 2 pages, and the whole piece does not make 4, we give you credit, and we expect the same civility from you, because the love and desire of peace are not confined to Quakerism. Peace is the natural as well as the religious wish of all denominations of men. And on this ground, as people working to establish an independent constitution of our own, we go beyond all others in our hope, our end, and our aim. Our plan is peace forever. We are tired of contention with Britain, and can see no real end to it except final separation. We act consistently, because it is for the sake of bringing in an endless and uninterrupted peace that we bear the evils and burdens of the present day. We are trying, and will steadily continue trying, to separate and dissolve a connection that has already filled our land with blood, and that, as long as its name remains, will be the fatal cause of future mischiefs to both countries. We fight neither for revenge nor conquest, neither from pride nor passion. We are not insulting the world with our fleets and armies, nor plundering the globe. We are attacked beneath the shade of our own vines. Violence is committed against us in our own houses and on our own lands. We view our enemies as highwaymen and housebreakers, and since the civil law gives us no defense, we are forced to punish them by military law, and to use the sword in the very case where you have before now used the halter. Perhaps we feel for the ruined and insulted sufferers in every part of the continent, with a tenderness that has not yet found its way into some of your hearts. But be sure that you do not mistake the cause and ground of your testimony. Do not call coldness of soul religion, nor put the bigot in the place of the Christian. O you partial ministers of your own acknowledged principles! If bearing arms is sinful, then beginning a war must be far more sinful, by the whole difference between willful attack and unavoidable defense. Therefore, if you truly preach from conscience, and do not mean to make a political hobby-horse out of your religion, convince the world of it by proclaiming your doctrine to our enemies, for they also bear arms. Give us proof of your sincerity by publishing it at St. James's to the commanders-in-chief at Boston, to the admirals and captains who are piratically ravaging our coasts, and to all the murdering miscreants who act with authority under the one you profess to serve. If you had the honest soul of Barclay, you would preach repentance to your king. You would tell the royal wretch his sins and warn him of eternal ruin. You would not spend your one-sided attacks only against the injured and insulted, but, like faithful ministers, would cry aloud and spare none. Do not say that you are persecuted, and do not try to make us the authors of the shame you are bringing on yourselves, for we testify to all people that we do not complain against you because you are Quakers, but because you pretend to be Quakers and are not.
Here Paine is striking close to home. This Quaker address was added to the enlarged edition on February the 14th, 1776, and Paine had been raised with Quaker influence through his father. So this is not an outsider jeering at pacifism. It is a son of that moral world saying, with chilly precision, if conscience condemns weapons, send the sermon to the invader as well as the invaded.
Thou hast tasted of prosperity and adversity. Thou knowest what it is to be banished thy native country, to be overruled as well as to rule, and set upon the throne. And being oppressed thou hast reason to know how hateful the oppressor is both to God and man. if after all these warnings and advertisements thou dost not turn unto the Lord with all thy heart, but forget him who remembered thee in thy distress, and give up thyself to follow lust and vanity, surely great will be thy condemnation. Against which snare, as well as the temptation of those who may or do feed thee, and prompt thee to evil, the most excellent and prevalent remedy will be, to apply thyself to that light of Christ which shineth in thy conscience, and which neither can, nor will flatter thee, nor suffer thee to be at ease in thy sins. Barclay's address to Charles Roman II. Alas! From the particular tendency of some parts of your testimony, and from other parts of your conduct, it seems as though all sin had been reduced to, and included in, the act of bearing arms, and only when the people do it. To us you appear to have mistaken party for conscience, because the general course of your actions lacks consistency. And it is extremely hard for us to give credit to many of your pretended scruples, because we see them raised by the same men who, at the very moment they are crying out against the mammon of this world, are nevertheless chasing after it with a step as steady as time, and an appetite as sharp as death. The passage you quoted from Proverbs on the 3rd page of your testimony, that, when a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him, was chosen very unwisely on your part. It proves the opposite of what you intended. If the king whom you are eager to support had ways that please the Lord, then his reign would be peaceful. Since it is not peaceful, your own quotation stands against him. I now turn to the later part of your testimony, the part for which everything before it seems to have been only an introduction, namely, it hath ever been our judgment and principle, since we were called to profess the light of Christ Jesus, manifested in our consciences unto this day, that the setting up and putting down kings and governments is God's peculiar prerogative, for causes best known to himself, and that it is not our business to have any hand or contrivance therein, nor to be busybodies above our station, much less to plot and contrive the ruin or overturn of any of them, but to pray for the king, and safety of our nation, and good of all men, that we may live a peaceable and quiet life, in all godliness and honesty, under the government which God is pleased to set over us. If these are truly your principles, why do you not live by them? Why do you not leave what you call God's work for God himself to manage? These very principles tell you to wait patiently and humbly for the outcome of all public measures, and to receive that outcome as the will of heaven toward you. So what need is there for your political testimony, if you fully believe what it says? The act of publishing it proves either that you do not believe what you profess, or that you do not have enough virtue to practice what you believe. The principles of Quakerism naturally tend to make a man a quiet and harmless subject under any government placed over him. And if the setting up and putting down of kings and governments is God's peculiar prerogative, then surely we cannot rob him of it. Therefore the principle itself requires you to approve everything that has ever happened, or may ever happen, to kings as being God's work. Oliver Cromwell thanks you. Charles, then, did not die by the hands of men. And if the present proud imitator of him should come to the same untimely end, the writers and publishers of the testimony are bound, by the doctrine it contains, to applaud the deed.
A small biographical dagger is hidden here. Paine was not merely scolding Quakers from outside the meeting-house window. His father was a Quaker, and Paine had been raised among precisely this language of conscience and peace. This address was added to the enlarged edition of February 14, 1776. One might say he knew which family cupboard contained the sharpest crockery.
Kings are not removed by miracles, and changes in government are not brought about by any means except those that are common and human, the very kinds of means we are using now. Even the scattering of the Jews, though foretold by our Savior, was carried out by arms. Therefore, since you refuse to be the means on one side, you ought not to meddle on the other. You ought to wait for the result in silence. And unless you can produce divine authority to prove that the Almighty, who created and placed this new world at the greatest possible distance east and west from every part of the old one, nevertheless disapproves of its being independent from the corrupt and abandoned court of Britain, unless, I say, you can show this, how can you, on the basis of your own principles, justify stirring up the people firmly to unite in the abhorrence of all such writings and measures as evidence a desire and design to break off the happy connection we have hitherto enjoyed with the kingdom of Great Britain, and our just and necessary subordination to the king, and those who are lawfully placed in authority under him? What a slap in the face this is! The very men who, in the paragraph just before, quietly and passively handed over the ordering, changing, and disposal of kings and governments to God, are now taking back their principles and claiming a share in the business. Is it possible that the conclusion just quoted can in any way follow from the doctrine they laid down? The inconsistency is too obvious to miss, the absurdity is too large not to be laughed at. It could only have been made by people whose understanding was darkened by the narrow and sour spirit of a desperate political party. For you are not to be taken as the whole body of the Quakers, but only as a factional and fractional part of it. Here ends my examination of your testimony. I call on no man to abhor it, as you have done with writings on the other side, but only to read it and judge it fairly. To this I add the following remark. The phrase the setting up and putting down of kings must certainly mean making a man king who is not yet one, and making a man no king who already is one. And pray, what does that have to do with the present case? We do not mean to set up or put down, to make or unmake. We mean to have nothing to do with them. Therefore, your testimony, from whatever angle it is viewed, serves only to dishonor your judgment, and for many other reasons it would have been better left alone than published. First, because it tends to lessen and disgrace all religion, and is extremely dangerous to society, to make religion a party in political disputes. Secondly, because it presents a whole body of men as if they were involved in and approving of publishing political testimonies, when many of them disown such publications. Thirdly, because it tends to undo that continental harmony and friendship which you yourselves, by your late generous and charitable donations, helped establish, and whose preservation is of the greatest importance to us all. And here, without anger or resentment, I bid you farewell. I sincerely wish that, as men and Christians, you may always fully and uninterruptedly enjoy every civil and religious right, and that you may, in your turn, help secure those rights for others. But I also wish that the example you have unwisely set of mixing religion with politics may be disowned and condemned by every inhabitant of America.
The birthday of a new world is at hand. So the corset maker's son promised in February of 1776, and for once a pamphleteer's boast kept its schedule. 5 months later the Continental Congress declared the free and independent states Paine had demanded, in language his pamphlet had made thinkable. He asked for a navy, and America built one. He asked for a charter, and got a declaration. He asked, perhaps most remarkably, for nothing for himself. By most accounts the profits went to the Revolution. Common sense remains what it was, the plain argument that made ordinary people believe they could begin the world over again. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly. And before the lamp goes out, a small request. If something tonight taught you, or surprised you, or simply delighted you, do leave a comment and tell me what it was. And if there is a work, an author, or a tale you should like me to take up next, set it down there as well. I read every one, and many an episode has begun its life as a viewer's suggestion. Until next time.